Your cat does not love you. At least, not in the way your dog loves you. Not in the way that would make evolutionary sense for a small predator that spent millions of years hunting alone in the dark, padding silently through desert scrub on soft paws, seeing in near total darkness with eyes that evolved for one purpose and one purpose only: to find and kill small things. Your cat is not a pack animal. Your cat has no instinct to follow a leader, to obey commands, to seek approval from a dominant member of a social hierarchy. Your dog will look at you with an expression that says, "You are the most important being in the universe." Your cat will look at you with an expression that says you are an acceptable source of warmth and food, and that this arrangement will continue for as long as it remains convenient. Your cat, if we are being honest about the biology, is a solitary desert hunter that wandered into a grain storage building somewhere in the Fertile Crescent approximately 10,000 years ago, found that the mice were plentiful and the humans were tolerable, and decided to stay. Nobody invited it. Nobody selected it for desirable traits the way we selected wolves that were less aggressive and more cooperative, until, generation by generation, they became dogs. Nobody bred it for a purpose, the way we bred horses for speed and cattle for milk and sheep for wool. The cat simply arrived. It observed the situation. It determined that the arrangement was acceptable. And it has been living with us on its own terms ever since, for 100 centuries, across every continent, through the rise and fall of every civilization that has existed since the invention of agriculture. And yet you have probably, at some point, looked at a cat, your cat or someone else's cat, or a cat in a video that was 45 seconds long and that you watched 11 times, and felt something warm and involuntary, something suspiciously like love. You have watched a cat curl into a perfect circle on a blanket, tucking its nose under its tail with a precision that seems almost mathematical, and felt your heart rate slow. You have heard a cat purr against your chest at 3 in the morning, when the world was quiet and dark, and felt a calm settle over you that no meditation app, no breathing exercise, no pharmaceutical intervention has ever managed to produce. You have watched a cat push a glass off a table with calm, deliberate, unhurried precision, making eye contact with you the entire time, as if conducting a scientific experiment in which you are the subject, and felt, despite everything, despite the broken glass and the water on the floor, a rush of affection for this small, impossible creature that shares your home, but has never once, in the entire history of the species, agreed to do a single thing it did not already want to do. This is one of the great mysteries of the human relationship with animals. We have shared our homes with cats for 100 centuries, longer than we have had written language, longer than we have had cities, longer than we have had the wheel. We have worshipped them as gods. In ancient Egypt, killing a cat, even accidentally, was a crime punishable by death, and when a household cat died, the entire family shaved their eyebrows in mourning. We have also burned them as demons. In medieval Europe, cats were associated with witchcraft and heresy, and they were tortured and killed by the thousands in public spectacles that entire towns gathered to watch. We have carried them on ships to every continent on Earth, not always intentionally, but always inevitably, Because wherever humans went, the mice went. And wherever the mice went, the cats followed. We have built them a permanent, unassailable kingdom on the internet, where they reign unchallenged over every other form of content, where a single photograph of a cat with an irritated facial expression generated more revenue than most human artists will earn in a lifetime. And after all of that, after the worship and the persecution and the global diaspora and the digital coronation, after 10,000 years of cohabitation, we are still not entirely sure what they think of us. We know what dogs think of us. Dogs are transparent. Dogs are emotionally legible in a way that makes them easy to understand and easy to love. A dog's face says everything. A dog's tail says everything. A dog that loves you communicates that love with the subtlety of a fireworks display. But a cat that loves you, communicates that love by sitting in the same room as you and blinking slowly. A cat that loves you brings you a dead bird and leaves it on your pillow like a message whose meaning you are expected to understand without explanation. A cat that loves you will tolerate being held for approximately 4 seconds before informing you, with a firmness that does not invite negotiation, that the interaction is over. There are approximately 600 million domestic cats living in human homes around the world right now. Another 600 million live as strays or ferals, semi-wild cats that exist in the spaces between human settlement, hunting and scavenging and reproducing on their own schedule, answering to no one. Together, these 1.2 billion cats represent one of the most successful species on the planet, an animal that has colonized every continent except Antarctica, that thrives in deserts and forests and cities and suburbs and islands and ships, that has survived being worshipped and being demonized and being ignored, and that has emerged from 10,000 years of living alongside the most dominant species in the history of life on Earth, with its fundamental nature almost entirely unchanged. A house cat in a modern apartment in Tokyo is genetically and behaviorally almost indistinguishable from the African wildcat that first walked into a Mesopotamian grain store 10 millennia ago. We changed the dog. We shaped the dog into something new, into hundreds of breeds, from Chihuahuas to Great Danes, animals so different from each other that they barely seem like the same species. But we did not change the cat. The cat changed its situation without changing itself. It found a niche. It moved in. And it has been exploiting that niche with quiet, patient, extraordinary efficiency ever since. You are listening to Histomnia. If this kind of story helps you rest, consider subscribing. It truly helps the channel grow. And let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? We love knowing who is with us in the quiet hours. And if there is a topic you would like to hear next, leave it below. Close your eyes if you like. Let the sounds of the world around you grow quiet. Tonight, we are going to follow the cat, this small, strange, impossibly successful animal, across the full arc of his history with us. From the grain stores of ancient Mesopotamia, where the partnership began, through the temples of Egypt where cats became sacred, through the dark centuries of medieval Europe, where they were tortured and killed in the name of God, to their quiet return on the merchant ships and naval vessels that built the modern world. We will look at the science of why cats behave the way they do, why they purr, why they bring you dead animals, why they knock things off tables with such evident satisfaction, why they seem to stare at empty corners of rooms as if they can see something you cannot. The science turns out to be stranger and more interesting than you might expect. There is a parasite involved. There is a frequency of vibration that may actually heal bones. There is a type of vocalization that cats use exclusively on humans, a sound they never make with other cats, that appears to have been specifically evolved to manipulate us. And then we will follow the cat into the place where it currently reigns supreme, the internet. We will trace how a species that spent 10,000 years as a quiet companion became, in the space of a single decade, the most popular animal in the history of mass media. We will look at the neuroscience of why cat videos make us feel the way they do. We will ask why cats, specifically, and not dogs or hamsters or fish, conquered the internet so completely that the early internet was sometimes described, only half-jokingly, as a machine for distributing pictures of cats. And we will try to answer the question that 10,000 years of living together has still not fully resolved. Does your cat love you? The answer, it turns out, is complicated. It requires some understanding of neuroscience and evolutionary biology and the particular way that a solitary predator processes the concept of attachment. But it is also, in a way that says something important about both cats and humans, genuinely beautiful. Every domestic cat on Earth, every tabby sleeping on a sofa in London, every ginger cat watching birds through a window in Montreal, every black cat crossing a street in Istanbul, every calico sprawled across a keyboard in Tokyo, descends from a single subspecies of wildcat. Its scientific name is Felis sylvestris libica. The North African wildcat, a small sandy-colored striped predator that still exists today in the deserts and dry grasslands of North Africa and the Near East, living almost exactly as it lived 10,000 years ago, before any of its descendants had ever seen the inside of a human home. If you saw one, you might mistake it for a domestic cat. It is roughly the same size, perhaps slightly larger, slightly longer in the leg, slightly leaner in the body. Its coat is a pale sandy brown with faint tabby stripes, well suited to disappearing into dry grass and rocky terrain. Its eyes are large and amber-colored, adapted for hunting in the dim light of dusk and dawn, when the small rodents and lizards it feeds on are most active. It moves with the same fluid, silent, precise economy of motion that you can observe in any house cat stalking a toy across a living room floor. The resemblance is not coincidental. It is genetic. Your cat is this animal. The fur color may have changed. The temperament may have softened slightly. But the fundamental architecture, the skeleton, the musculature, the sensory systems, the hunting instincts, the solitary disposition, remains almost identical. This is remarkable, and it becomes more remarkable when you compare it to the other animals that humans have domesticated. The dog diverged from the wolf somewhere between 15,000 and 40,000 years ago, and in that time we have reshaped it so thoroughly that a chihuahua and a wolf no longer look like they belong to the same kingdom, let alone the same species. cattle were derived from the aurochs, a massive wild ox that stood 6 feet tall at the shoulder and weighed over a ton. An animal so different from a modern dairy cow that if you saw one, you would think it was a different creature entirely. Sheep, goats, pigs, horses, chickens, every domesticated animal has been profoundly altered by the process of living alongside humans, shaped by thousands of years of selective breeding into something that serves human purposes and that could not survive, in most cases, without human care. The cat is the exception. The cat was never reshaped. It was never bent to human purpose in the way that a border collie was bred to herd sheep, or a retriever was bred to fetch game, or a draft horse was bred to pull heavy loads. There were no ancient breeding programs for cats. There were no careful selections for desirable traits across generations. The cat simply appeared in human settlements, performed a service that humans found valuable, killing the rodents that ate their stored grain, and was tolerated, and then accepted, and then gradually, over centuries and millennia, incorporated into the household as something between a pest controller and a companion. But it was never controlled. It was never owned in the way that livestock is owned. It came and went as it pleased. It bred with whomever it chose. And it retained, through all of this, the essential independence that defines it to this day. The story of how this happened begins in a place called the Fertile Crescent, a curved sweep of relatively well-watered land stretching from the eastern shore of the Mediterranean through modern-day Syria and Iraq and down to the Persian Gulf. This is where agriculture began. Approximately 12,000 years ago, the people who lived in this region began doing something that no human population had done before. They began deliberately planting and cultivating wild grains. Wheat, barley, emmer. They cleared land, planted seeds, harvested crops, and stored the surplus in buildings and pits and ceramic vessels. For the first time in human history, there was a concentration of food in one place, a stockpile, a reserve, a guarantee against future scarcity. And the mice came. Of course they did. A mountain of stored grain is, from the perspective of a mouse, the greatest thing that has ever happened in the history of the universe. It is an unlimited, concentrated, defenseless food supply that requires no hunting, no foraging, no effort of any kind. The mice that lived in the fields surrounding these early farming settlements would have been drawn to the grain stores immediately and irresistibly. They would have bred prolifically in an environment of essentially unlimited food. Their populations would have exploded, and the early farmers, watching their carefully stored grain being consumed by a growing army of rodents, would have had a serious problem. And then the cats came. The wildcats, the Felis silvestris libica that lived in the surrounding landscape, would have noticed the mice. A concentration of prey is, from the perspective of a cat, essentially the same thing as a concentration of grain is from the perspective of a mouse. An irresistible opportunity. The bolder, less fearful wildcats, the ones whose temperament allowed them to tolerate the presence of these large, noisy, unpredictable bipedal creatures, would have ventured closer to the settlements, hunting the mice that were hunting the grain. And the farmers, watching these small predators kill the rodents that were destroying their food supply would have done the most natural thing in the world. They would have let them stay. This is what scientists call commensalism, a relationship in which one species benefits from the activities of another without significantly helping or harming it. The cats benefited from the concentrated prey. The humans benefited from the pest control. Neither species made a conscious decision to enter into a partnership. The arrangement simply emerged from the overlap of two sets of interests: the human interest in protecting grain and the feline interest in eating mice. No contract was signed. No terms were negotiated. The cat walked in, and both parties found the situation acceptable. The archaeological evidence for this process comes from several sites, but the most important is a site on the island of Cyprus called Chilorakambos. In 2004, archaeologists working at this site discovered something extraordinary: the burial of a human and a cat, placed together in a single grave, dating to approximately 7,500 years before the Common Era. The cat was about 8 months old at the time of death. It was buried just 40 centimeters from the human body in a separate but clearly associated pit, with its body oriented in the same direction as the human. There were no cat species native to Cyprus. The cat had been brought to the island by humans deliberately across the sea. And it had been buried with care and intention, in a way that suggests it held significance, emotional, spiritual, or both, for the person it was buried with. This burial tells us something important. By 7,500 years before the Common Era, nearly 10,000 years ago, cats were not just useful animals that hung around human settlements, eating mice. They were companions. They were valued enough to be transported across water to a new land. They were valued enough to be buried alongside the dead. The relationship had already moved beyond commensalism into something more intimate, more personal, more recognizable to anyone who has ever loved a cat. But even at this early stage, even at the very beginning of the relationship, the cat remained fundamentally itself. It had not been changed by the process of living with humans. It had simply found a situation that suited it and stayed. The mice were plentiful. The humans were warm. The arrangement was convenient. And the cat, then as now, then as always, accepted the convenience without surrendering the independence. No civilization in the history of the world has loved cats the way ancient Egypt loved cats. Not appreciated them. Not kept them as pleasant household companions. Loved them with an intensity, a reverence, a devotion that crossed the line from affection into worship and stayed there for nearly 3,000 years. To understand how deeply cats were embedded in Egyptian culture, consider the following. The Egyptians had a goddess whose form was a cat. Her name was Bastet. In the early centuries of Egyptian civilization, she was depicted as a fierce lioness, a warrior goddess associated with the sun, with protection, with the destructive power of royal authority. But over time, across centuries of theological evolution, Bastet softened. The lioness became a domestic cat. The warrior became a guardian of the home, a protector of women and children, a goddess of fertility and music and joy and the peaceful domestic hearth. She was one of the most popular deities in the Egyptian pantheon. Not the most powerful, not the most feared, but perhaps the most beloved. Her temples were filled with offerings. Her festivals were among the largest and most enthusiastically attended in the entire Egyptian calendar. The Greek historian Herodotus, who visited Egypt in the 5th century before the Common Era, described the annual festival of Bastet at the city of Bubastis with a mixture of admiration and astonishment. He wrote that 700,000 people, a number that is almost certainly exaggerated, but that captures the scale of the event, traveled to Bubastis by boat along the Nile, singing and dancing and drinking wine in quantities that, according to Herodotus, exceeded the wine consumption of the entire rest of the year combined. The festival was joyful, ecstatic, celebratory. And at its center was the cat, the sacred animal of a goddess who represented everything the Egyptians valued about domestic life. But the reverence for cats in Egypt went far beyond festivals and temples. It penetrated every level of daily life. Cats were protected by law. Killing a cat in ancient Egypt, even accidentally, even in self-defense, was a crime that could be punished by death. 1st century historian Diodorus Siculus recorded an incident in which a Roman soldier stationed in Egypt accidentally killed a cat and was lynched by a mob of Egyptians despite the attempts of Roman officials to intervene. The political relationship between Rome and Egypt was at that moment extremely delicate. Egypt could not afford to offend Rome. And yet the killing of a cat was so unacceptable, so viscerally offensive to Egyptian sensibilities, that the mob acted anyway, consequences be damned. When a household cat died of natural causes, the family that owned it entered a period of mourning. They shaved their eyebrows as a visible sign of grief. The cat's body was treated with the same reverence that was extended to human remains. It was embalmed. It was wrapped in linen. It was painted or decorated. And it was buried, sometimes in family tombs, sometimes in vast cemeteries dedicated exclusively to cats, where hundreds of thousands of mummified felines were laid to rest with prayers and offerings and small dishes of milk left for their journey into the afterlife. The scale of these cat cemeteries is almost beyond comprehension. At the site of Beni Hassan in central Egypt, a cat cemetery was discovered in the 1880s that contained an estimated 300,000 mummified cats. 300,000. The sheer number of bodies was so enormous, and the archaeological methods of the time were so crude that the majority of the mummies were not preserved for study. Instead, they were shipped to England by the ton, literally weighed and sold by the ton, to be ground up and used as fertilizer on English farms. 19 tons of cat mummies were auctioned in a single lot in Liverpool in 1890. The auctioneer used one of the mummified cats as a gavel. It is one of the stranger moments in the history of archaeology, and one of the sadder ones. 3,000 years of devotion reduced to agricultural mulch. Not all of these cats died of natural causes. Recent studies using modern scanning technology have revealed that many of the cat mummies in Egyptian collections, perhaps the majority, were young cats, often kittens, whose necks had been deliberately broken. They were bred and killed specifically to be mummified, and offered to Bastet as votive gifts. Pilgrims visiting the temples could purchase a mummified cat the way a modern tourist might buy a candle to light in a cathedral, a small, tangible offering to the divine. The demand was so high that an entire industry grew up around the breeding, killing, mummifying, and selling of cats for religious purposes. It is a troubling detail, one that complicates the narrative of Egyptian cat worship. The Egyptians loved cats enough to make them sacred. They also loved their goddess enough to kill cats by the thousands in her name. The two impulses coexisted without apparent contradiction. Egypt also attempted to control the export of cats. Cats were considered so valuable, both as sacred animals and as practical pest controllers in a grain-dependent economy, that taking a cat out of Egypt was illegal. The government reportedly dispatched agents to neighboring countries to retrieve cats that had been smuggled out. Whether these retrieval missions actually happened as described is debatable. The ancient sources are not always reliable on matters of detail, but the existence of the prohibition tells us something about how seriously the Egyptians took their cats. They were a national resource. They were a divine trust. They were not to be given away. But of course, cats cannot be contained. This is one of the fundamental truths about cats that the Egyptians, for all their devotion, never quite accepted. Cats go where they choose. They were carried out of Egypt by Phoenician traders, by Greek merchants, by anyone with a ship and a hold full of grain that needed protecting from rats. They spread along the trade routes of the ancient Mediterranean, to Greece, to Italy, to the coast of North Africa, to the islands of the Aegean. By the time of the Roman Empire, cats were established throughout the Mediterranean world, no longer exclusively Egyptian, no longer exclusively sacred, but increasingly common as household animals, valued for their usefulness and, gradually, for their company. The Romans had a more practical relationship with cats than the Egyptians did. They did not worship them. They did not mummify them. They kept them for pest control, and they appreciated them as household animals, and they depicted them occasionally in mosaics and frescoes, usually in domestic scenes, sitting beside a table or playing with a piece of string, looking very much like the cats that sit in modern living rooms, looking at modern humans with the same expression of tolerant indifference. The Romans recognized what the cat was: a useful, pleasant, fundamentally independent creature that lived in your house but did not belong to you in any meaningful sense. They were comfortable with this arrangement. They did not need the cat to be a god. They were happy for it to be a cat. But the era of comfortable coexistence would not last. As the Roman Empire declined and a new religious and cultural order rose to take its place in Europe, the cat's fortunes were about to change dramatically. For nearly 1,000 years, across the length and breadth of medieval Christendom, the cat would go from being tolerated to being feared, from being useful to being suspect, from being a quiet presence in the household to being an agent of the devil himself. The centuries that followed would be the darkest in the long history of the human relationship with cats. And they would begin, as so many dark chapters do, with suspicion, superstition, and fear. For approximately 3,000 years, from the grain stores of the Fertile Crescent to the fall of the Roman Empire, cats had done well. They had been tolerated, appreciated, worshipped, transported, and incorporated into human life across the ancient world with relatively little difficulty. They had survived the transition from wild animal to household companion without losing their essential nature. They had been useful. They had been loved. In Egypt, they had been divine. Even in Rome, where they were not worshipped, they had been respected, practical, pleasant animals that earned their place in the household by killing rats and asking for very little in return. And then medieval Europe happened. The centuries that followed the fall of Rome, roughly from the 5th century through the 15th century of the Common Era, were the worst period in the entire history of the relationship between humans and cats. Over the course of 1,000 years, cats went from being useful household companions to being objects of suspicion, fear, hatred, and systematic persecution. They were associated with witchcraft, with heresy, with the devil himself. They were tortured and killed in public ceremonies. They were burned alive in bonfires on feast days while crowds watched and cheered. They were thrown from the tops of buildings in annual rituals that entire cities participated in. The scale of the killing is difficult to estimate with precision, but it was enormous. Millions of cats over hundreds of years destroyed in the name of God and the fear of evil. How did this happen? How did an animal that had been worshipped as a goddess in Egypt become an agent of Satan in France? The answer lies in a combination of factors, theological, cultural, and psychological, that came together in medieval Europe to create a perfect storm of superstition and violence directed at an animal that had the terrible misfortune of being independent, nocturnal, and impossible to fully control. The first factor was theological. As Christianity spread across Europe in the centuries after Rome's fall, it brought with it a worldview that divided creation into the sacred and the profane, the godly and the demonic, the light and the dark. Animals were not exempt from this division. Some animals were considered good: the lamb, the dove, the fish, symbols of Christ, of the Holy Spirit, of the faithful. Other animals were considered bad: the serpent, obviously, but also the goat, the raven, the bat, and increasingly the cat. The cat's nocturnal habits made it suspicious. It hunted at night when decent creatures slept. Its eyes glowed in the dark, a phenomenon that we now understand as the reflection of light from a layer of tissue behind the retina, called the tapetum lucidum, but that, to a medieval observer, looked unmistakably like the fires of hell burning behind the pupils of a creature that should not be trusted. The cat's independence was also a problem. Medieval Christian culture valued obedience to God, to the church, to the feudal lord, to the natural hierarchies that were understood to reflect the divine order of creation. The dog was obedient. The dog came when called, followed commands, submitted to its master with visible humility. The dog was, in this sense, a good Christian animal. The cat was not obedient. The cat came when it chose. The cat ignored commands with a serenity that could only be described as contemptuous. The cat answered to no one, submitted to no authority, and conducted itself with a self-possession that, in a culture that equated independence with rebellion and rebellion with sin, was deeply unsettling. And then there was the association with women. Cats had long been associated with femininity, with Basta in Egypt, with Freya in Norse mythology, with the domestic sphere, with the quiet, private, interior world of the home. In medieval Europe, this association became dangerous. As the Church's anxieties about heresy and witchcraft intensified from the 12th century onward, women who lived on the margins of society, old women, unmarried women, women who lived alone, women who kept to themselves and kept cats for company, became the primary targets of suspicion. The cat became the witch's familiar, the demonic companion that served as a link between the witch and the devil, that carried messages, that performed dark errands, that sat on the witch's shoulder and whispered evil counsel in her ear. In 1233, Pope Gregory IX issued a papal bull called Vox in Rama, which is sometimes cited as the document that officially demonized cats in Christian Europe. The bull was actually directed against a heretical sect in Germany, but it contained vivid descriptions of supposed rituals in which the heretics worshipped a black cat as a manifestation of the devil. Whether or not Gregory intended it as a general condemnation of cats, the effect was powerful. The association between cats and devil worship was now backed by papal authority. And in a civilization that took papal authority very, very seriously, this was essentially a death sentence for cats across the continent. The killing took many forms. In some cities, cats were burned alive in public bonfires on the Feast of St. John, celebrated on the 24th of June. In Paris, this was a major civic event. Cats were collected in advance, placed in baskets or sacks, and thrown into a bonfire in the Place de Grève, while the crowd celebrated and the king sometimes watched from a nearby window. The practice continued for centuries. It was not abolished in Paris until the reign of Louis XIV in the mid-1600s. In the Belgian city of Ypres, there was an annual festival called Kattensto, the Festival of the Cats, in which live cats were thrown from the top of the Cloth Hall, a building over 70 meters tall. The practice dates to at least the 12th century and continued intermittently for hundreds of years. The modern city of Ypres still holds the festival, but now they throw stuffed toy cats instead of live ones, and the event has been reframed as a celebration of the city's history rather than a reenactment of medieval cruelty. But for centuries, the original version was exactly what it sounds like. Live cats thrown from a great height to the amusement of the crowd below. The irony of all this killing is that it almost certainly made things worse. Much worse. The connection between the mass killing of cats in medieval Europe and the severity of the Black Death, which arrived in Europe in 1347 and killed between 30 and 60% of the continent's population, has been debated by historians. The relationship is probably not as simple as the popular version suggests. The idea that Europeans killed all the cats, which allowed the rat population to explode, which spread the plague. The plague was transmitted primarily by fleas on rats, but also by human-to-human contact and possibly by other vectors. Cats alone could not have stopped it. But it is almost certainly true that a healthy cat population would have helped suppress the rat population, and that the systematic persecution of cats in the centuries leading up to the plague removed one of the few natural checks on the rodents that carried the disease. The medieval campaign against cats, motivated by superstition and fear, may have contributed to the conditions that allowed the greatest epidemic in European history to reach the catastrophic proportions that it did. It is a grim chapter, the darkest in the long story of cats and humans. But cats, as a species, survived it. They survived it because they are extraordinarily resilient, because they breed prolifically, because they are adaptable in ways that few other animals can match, and because, even during the worst of the persecution, there were always people who kept cats, who valued them, who refused to participate in the madness. Farmers kept cats to protect grain. Sailors kept cats to control rats on ships. Monasteries, the very institutions of the church that condemned cats theologically, often kept cats practically, because the monks understood that books and grain needed protection from rodents, and that cats provided it better than any alternative. The persecution gradually faded as the Middle Ages gave way to the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, as superstition loosened its grip on European culture, as the witch trials declined, as the association between cats and the devil slowly weakened under the weight of reason and changing sensibility. By the 17th and 18th centuries, cats were beginning to be welcomed back into European homes, not yet as the pampered companions of the modern era, but as useful, tolerated, cautiously appreciated animals whose long ordeal was finally, quietly, coming to an end. And then came the ships. The age of European exploration, which began in earnest in the 15th century and accelerated through the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, was many things. An era of discovery, of conquest, of colonization, of trade, of brutality, of transformation. It was the period in which the modern world was built, for better and for worse, through the movement of people and goods and ideas and diseases across oceans that had previously separated civilizations from each other. It was also, from the perspective of the domestic cat, the greatest opportunity for geographic expansion that any feline species had ever encountered. Every ship needed a cat. This was not sentiment. This was not superstition, though there was plenty of superstition involved. This was practical necessity. A wooden sailing ship carrying food supplies across an ocean was, from the perspective of a rat, an irresistible enclosed habitat, a floating buffet with no exit and no predators, where a breeding pair of rats could produce hundreds of offspring in the time it took to cross the Atlantic. Rats ate the food. Rats gnawed the ropes. Rats chewed the wooden hulls. Rats spread disease among crews that were already living in cramped, unsanitary conditions. A ship without a cat was a ship with a rat problem, and a ship with a rat problem was a ship in danger. So every ship carried cats. Not one cat, usually several, because the rats were numerous and the ships were large, and one cat could not patrol an entire vessel. These ship cats were working animals in the fullest sense of the term. They earned their passage by hunting. They were valued by the crews, who understood their practical importance, and who also, being human, inevitably became attached to them. Sailors gave their ship cats' names. They shared their food with them. They carried them ashore in port and brought them back aboard before departure. In many navies, the presence of a ship's cat was considered essential to morale. A small, warm, living thing in an environment that was otherwise cold and hard and dangerous. The superstitions that surrounded ship cats were extensive and deeply held. In British naval tradition, a black cat aboard ship was considered good luck. Throwing a cat overboard or mistreating one in any way was believed to bring storms and disaster. If a ship's cat fell overboard, it was an omen of terrible misfortune. If a cat walked away from a ship in port and refused to return, it was taken as a sign that the ship was doomed, and some sailors would refuse to sail on it. These beliefs were not confined to the uneducated or the superstitious. Officers shared them. Captains took them seriously. The cat was, in the culture of the sailing ship, something between a crew member and a talisman, a living good luck charm that also happened to kill the rats that threatened the ship's survival. And wherever the ships went, the cats went with them. This is the mechanism by which cats completed their conquest of the planet. They had already spread across the Mediterranean world through ancient trade routes. Now, on the ships of the Portuguese, the Spanish, the Dutch, the English, the French, they traveled to places that no cat had ever been before. To the Americas, North and South. To sub-Saharan Africa. To India and Southeast Asia, where cats were already present, but where European ships introduced new populations. To Australia and New Zealand. To the remote islands of the Pacific, Hawaii, Fiji, Tahiti, Easter Island. To every port, every colony, every trading post, every settlement that European ships touched over the course of 4 centuries of global expansion. At every port, some cats stayed. They jumped ship, or they were given to local people as gifts, or they simply wandered off and found that the new environment suited them. Cats are extraordinarily adaptable. A cat that had spent months aboard a ship in the North Atlantic could step ashore on a Caribbean island and within days be hunting lizards and birds as if it had lived there all its life. A cat that had been born in an English dockyards could thrive in the heat of India, the cold of New England, the humidity of Southeast Asia. The same qualities that had made cats successful in the Fertile Crescent 10,000 years earlier, their adaptability, their self-sufficiency, their ability to hunt a wide range of prey, their tolerance of different environments, made them successful everywhere that ships carried them. The cats that stayed behind in these new lands bred. They bred prolifically because cats are among the most efficient reproducers in the mammalian world. A single female cat can produce 3 litters per year, with an average of 4 to 6 kittens per litter. If those kittens survive and breed in turn, a single pair of cats can theoretically produce hundreds of descendants within just a few years. In environments where there were no natural predators capable of controlling their numbers, which was the case on many of the islands and in many of the colonial settlements where they were introduced, cat populations grew rapidly. Within a generation or 2 of their arrival, cats were established as a permanent feature of the local landscape. Some of these cats remained associated with humans, living in homes and barns and warehouses, maintaining the ancient bargain of pest control in exchange for shelter and food. But many went feral. They returned to the wild, or more precisely, they returned to the semi-wild state that is the cat's natural condition, hunting for their own food, breeding on their own schedule, living alongside humans but not dependent on them. These feral populations spread beyond the settlements into forests and grasslands and mountains and coasts, establishing themselves as predators in ecosystems that had never encountered anything like them before. The ecological consequences of this global dispersal have been profound and, in many cases, devastating. Cats are extraordinarily effective predators. A single, well-fed domestic cat that is allowed outdoors will kill, on average, dozens of birds and small mammals per year, not because it needs to eat them, but because the hunting instinct is hardwired and irresistible, independent of hunger. Feral cats, which must hunt to survive, kill far more. On islands where native species evolved in the absence of mammalian predators, the introduction of cats has been catastrophic. Cats have been identified as a primary cause of extinction for at least 63 species of birds, mammals, and reptiles worldwide. On some islands, the introduction of a handful of cats led, within decades, to the complete elimination of native bird species that had no evolutionary experience with this kind of predator and no defense against it. The most famous example is the Stevens Island wren, a small, flightless bird that was native to a single island off the coast of New Zealand. In 1894, a lighthouse keeper named David Lyle brought his cat, Tibbles, to the island. Tibbles began catching birds and bringing them to Lyle, who recognized that they were unusual and sent specimens to ornithologists. By the time the species was formally described and named, it was already extinct. The popular version of the story says that Tibbles single-handedly drove the species to extinction, though the reality is slightly more complicated. There were likely other cats on the island as well. But the essential point stands. A small number of cats introduced to an island where a vulnerable species had no defenses was enough to erase that species from existence entirely. This is the paradox of the cat's global success. The same qualities that make cats beloved companions, their grace, their hunting ability, their self-sufficiency, their adaptability, make them devastating, invasive predators in environments where they do not belong. The ship cat that was welcomed aboard for its usefulness was also, unknowingly, the agent of ecological destruction on a scale that is still being measured. Today, feral cat populations exist on every continent except Antarctica, numbering in the hundreds of millions, and the debate over how to manage them, how to balance the welfare of cats against the survival of native wildlife, remains one of the most contentious issues in conservation biology. But the cat did not know any of this. The cat did not intend any of this. The cat did what the cat has always done. It found an opportunity. It exploited it. It survived. It thrived. It rode the ships because the ships had rats. It colonized the world because the world had mice and birds and lizards and warm places to sleep. It did not plan its conquest. It simply did what came naturally, with the quiet efficiency that has defined its species for 10,000 years. And by the time the age of sail was over, by the time steam engines replaced canvas and the great wooden ships were retired and scrapped, the cat had accomplished something that no other domesticated animal had achieved. It had colonized the entire planet. Not because humans forced it to, not because it was bred for the purpose, but because at every step, at every port, on every ship, it had found the arrangement acceptable, and it had stayed. There is a question that every cat owner has asked at some point, usually while watching their cat do something inexplicable. Why? Why does my cat stare at the wall for 20 minutes, as if it can see something that I cannot? Why does my cat sprint from one end of the apartment to the other at 3 in the morning with the urgency of an animal fleeing a predator that does not exist? Why does my cat sit in a box that is clearly too small for it, with its legs folded underneath its body at angles that do not look comfortable, when there is a perfectly good bed 3 feet away? Why does my cat bring me a dead mouse and place it on the kitchen floor with an expression of what appears to be pride? Why does my cat knock my water glass off the table while maintaining direct eye contact with me, as if daring me to do something about it? The answer to all of these questions, to virtually every question about cat behavior that has ever confused a human being, begins with a single, fundamental fact. Your cat is barely domesticated. It is, in the terminology that scientists use, semi-domesticated, an animal that has adapted to living alongside humans, but that has not been fundamentally altered by the process. It retains the instincts, the sensory systems, the behavioral patterns, and the cognitive architecture of a wild predator. It is, in a very real sense, a wild animal that has agreed to live in your house. To understand what this means, it helps to compare cats with dogs, because the comparison illuminates just how unusual the cat situation is. Dogs were domesticated through a process of active selection that lasted tens of thousands of years. Humans chose the wolves that were least aggressive, most cooperative, most attentive to human social cues, and bred them together, generation after generation, producing animals that were progressively more attuned to human behavior, more responsive to human commands, more emotionally dependent on human companionship. The result, after thousands of generations of this selective pressure, is an animal that is exquisitely adapted to reading human emotions, following human directions, and forming deep social bonds with human beings. Dogs have evolved the ability to follow a human pointing gesture, something that seems trivially simple, but that almost no other animal, including our closest primate relatives, can do reliably. Dogs have evolved a specific facial muscle, the levator anguli oculi medialis, which raises the inner eyebrow, that wolves do not have, and that exists apparently for the sole purpose of making the puppy dog eyes, expression that humans find irresistible. Dogs experience a surge of oxytocin, the so-called love hormone, when they gaze into their owner's eyes, and their owners experience the same surge in return, creating a biochemical feedback loop of mutual affection that is almost identical to the bond between a human parent and an infant. Dogs are, at a neurological level, designed to love us. They have been engineered by thousands of years of selective breeding to find human beings the most interesting, the most important, the most rewarding thing in their environment. Cats have none of this. Cats were never selected for their attentiveness to humans. Cats were never bred for their ability to follow commands, or read emotional cues, or gaze lovingly into their owner's eyes. Cats do not have the eyebrow muscle that dogs evolved. Cats do not reliably follow pointing gestures, though some studies suggest they can learn to if sufficiently motivated, which for a cat means if there is food involved and they happen to feel like cooperating at that particular moment. The oxytocin response in cats is present but weaker and less consistent than in dogs. Cats can bond with humans, and they do bond with humans, but the bond operates on different terms: less visible, less demonstrative, less eager, more conditional. The reason for this difference is not that cats are less intelligent than dogs. Cat brains and dog brains are roughly comparable in complexity, though they are organized differently. The cat brain has approximately 250 million neurons in the cerebral cortex. The dog brain has approximately 530 million. But raw neuron count is not a reliable measure of intelligence. It is a measure of processing capacity, and what matters is what the processing capacity is used for. Dogs use their neural resources for social cognition, for reading faces, following gestures, interpreting tones of voice, navigating complex social hierarchies. Cats use their neural resources for something entirely different, for sensory processing, for spatial memory, for the precise coordination of movement that makes them such extraordinary hunters. A cat's sensory world is almost unimaginably rich compared to ours. Their hearing extends into the ultrasonic range. They can hear frequencies up to 64,000 Hz, compared to our upper limit of roughly 20,000. This means they can hear the high-pitched squeaks of mice and other small rodents that are completely inaudible to the human ear. Their night vision is approximately 6 times better than ours, thanks to that reflective layer behind the retina, the tapetum lucidum, that medieval Europeans found so demonic. Their whiskers are exquisitely sensitive vibration detectors that can sense changes in air currents, allowing them to navigate in complete darkness and to detect the movement of nearby objects without seeing or touching them. Their sense of smell is approximately 14 times more powerful than a human's, though far less acute than a dog's. All of these senses are calibrated for hunting. The cat is, from its whiskers to its tail, a hunting machine. Every aspect of its body, the retractable claws that stay sharp because they are not worn down by walking, the flexible spine that allows it to twist and change direction in midair, the powerful hind legs that can launch it vertically to a height of 5 or 6 times its own body length, the padded paws that allow it to walk in near perfect silence, is optimized for the detection, pursuit, and killing of small prey. This is what the cat brain is doing with its 250 million neurons. It is not thinking about you. It is not wondering whether you approve of it. It is listening for the faint rustle of a mouse behind a wall, calculating angles and distances, preparing for a burst of explosive movement that will last less than a second, and that must be perfectly timed to succeed. This is why your cat stares at the wall. It is not seeing ghosts. It is hearing something. A mouse in the wall cavity, an insect behind the plaster, a vibration transmitted through the building structure that your comparatively crude senses cannot detect. Your cat is not being strange. Your cat is being a predator. It is doing exactly what it was built to do in an environment that does not always provide appropriate targets for its abilities. This is also why your cat sprints through the apartment at 3 in the morning. Cats are crepuscular, most active at dawn and dusk, the times when their prey is most active and their sensory advantages are greatest. A house cat that sleeps for 16 hours a day, which is normal, accumulates energy that, in a wild cat, would be expended in hunting. In a domestic cat that has no need to hunt, that energy has to go somewhere. The result is what cat owners call the zoomies, sudden, explosive bursts of activity that seem random and insane to a human observer, but that are simply the expression of a predator's pent-up energy in an environment that provides no prey to chase. And this is why your cat sits in a box that is too small for it. In the wild, small enclosed spaces provide safety. A cat in a tight space cannot be ambushed from behind or from the sides. It can only be approached from one direction, which makes it easier to defend. The preference for boxes and bags and small enclosed spaces is not a quirk. It is a survival instinct, a behavior that evolved over millions of years of being both a predator and prey, an animal that hunts but that can also be hunted by larger predators, and that learned very early that the safest place to rest is a place with walls on all sides and only one way in. Understanding cat behavior through the lens of their evolutionary history, through the fact that they are barely domesticated predators living in an artificial environment, does not make the behavior less charming or less entertaining. It makes it more interesting. When your cat stares at nothing, it is hearing a world you cannot hear. When your cat races through the house at midnight, it is burning the fuel that evolution stored for a hunt that never comes. When your cat squeezes into a shoebox, it is obeying an instinct that kept its ancestors alive in a world full of things that wanted to eat them. Your cat is not broken. Your cat is not strange. Your cat is a wild animal doing its best in a world that it was not designed for, and doing it, all things considered, remarkably well. Your cat is manipulating you. This is not an opinion. This is not an anthropomorphic projection. This is a conclusion supported by peer-reviewed research in animal behavior, and it begins with one of the most familiar sounds in the world, the meow. Here is a fact that surprises most people when they first hear it. Adult cats do not meow at each other. In the wild, meowing is a behavior used almost exclusively by kittens to communicate with their mothers, a vocalization that says, "I am here, I am hungry, I need attention, please come." As wild cats mature, they stop meowing. Adult wild cats communicate with each other through body language, through scent marking, through hissing and growling, and the occasional yowl during mating season. But they do not meow. The meow is a kitten sound. It is a sound that, in the normal course of feline development, is supposed to disappear. Domestic cats never stop meowing. They meow at humans constantly. When they want food, when they want attention, when they want a door opened, when they want to express displeasure at the quality of the food you have provided, when they want you to know that the litter box is not up to their standards, when they want nothing in particular but have decided that you should be aware of their presence. They have retained a juvenile behavior, a baby sound, specifically because it works on us. Humans respond to the meow the way they respond to a baby's cry, with attention, with concern, with an urge to fix whatever is wrong. The cat has learned, over thousands of years of living with humans, that the meow is the key that opens the door to human responsiveness. So it keeps meowing. Long after a wild cat would have gone silent, the domestic cat continues to speak to us in the language of infancy, because we cannot help but listen. What is even more remarkable is that cats have developed different meows for different purposes, and that their human owners can usually tell them apart. Studies conducted at Cornell University and at the University of Sussex have shown that cats produce acoustically distinct meows depending on what they want. The feed me meow is different from the let me out meow, which is different from the pay attention to me meow, which is different from the I am annoyed meow. The differences are subtle, variations in pitch, duration, and frequency, but experienced cat owners can identify them with surprising accuracy. Each cat-human pair develops over time a private vocabulary, a set of vocalizations that the cat produces and the human learns to interpret, creating a communication system that is unique to that specific relationship. But the most sophisticated piece of feline vocal manipulation is not the meow. It is a specific variant of the purr that researchers have called the solicitation purr. In 2009, a study led by Karen McComb at the University of Sussex identified a purring sound that cats produce when they want food, a purr that contains, embedded within it, a high-frequency cry that is similar in pitch to a human infant's distress call. The frequency of this embedded cry falls within the range of 200 to 600 Hz, precisely the range that humans find most urgent and most difficult to ignore. It is a purr that sounds pleasant on the surface, but that contains hidden inside it, like a message inside a message, a frequency that triggers the human caregiving instinct. When McComb played recordings of the solicitation purr to human subjects who did not own cats, they rated it as more urgent and less pleasant than a normal purr, even though they could not consciously identify what was different about it. The manipulation operates below the level of conscious awareness. You do not hear the embedded cry. You do not think to yourself, that purr contains a frequency similar to a baby's cry, and I should respond. You simply feel an urge to get up and feed the cat. The cat has, through some combination of learning and evolutionary adaptation, developed a sound that hacks directly into your parental circuitry, bypassing your rational mind entirely. The regular purr, the one that is not asking for anything, is equally fascinating, though for entirely different reasons. Cats purr at a frequency between 20 and 150 hertz, and there is a growing body of evidence that these frequencies have therapeutic properties. Vibrations in this range have been shown to promote bone density, reduce swelling, and accelerate the healing of soft tissue injuries. Cats purr when they are content, but they also purr when they are injured, when they are sick, when they are frightened, when they are dying. The prevailing theory is that purring serves a dual purpose. It communicates contentment in social situations, but it also functions as a form of self-healing, a way for the cat to stimulate its own body's repair mechanisms during periods of rest and recovery. This may explain something that veterinarians have long observed, that cats heal from bone fractures and surgeries significantly faster than dogs of comparable size. It may also explain why the sound of a cat purring has such a profound calming effect on humans. You are not imagining it. When you hold a purring cat and feel your body relax, when your heart rate slows and your breathing deepens and the anxiety of the day seems to loosen its grip on your chest, something physiological is actually happening. The vibrations are real. Their effects on biological tissue are measurable. The cat in your lap is, in a very literal sense, a vibrating therapeutic device that operates at precisely the frequency range that promotes healing and reduces stress. And then there is the slow blink. If you have spent time around cats, you have seen it. The cat looks at you and then slowly, deliberately, closes its eyes and opens them again in a gesture that is unmistakably intentional. Cat behaviorists call this the slow blink or the cat kiss, and research has confirmed that it is a genuine communicative signal. A study published in the journal Scientific Reports in 2020 found that cats were significantly more likely to slow blink at humans who slow blinked at them first, and that cats were more likely to approach an unfamiliar human who was slow blinking than one who was maintaining a neutral expression. In cat communication, a direct, unblinking stare is a threat. It is what a predator does before it attacks. Closing your eyes in the presence of another animal is the opposite. It is a declaration of trust, a signal that says, I do not consider you a threat. I am comfortable enough in your presence to make myself vulnerable. When your cat slow blinks at you, it is telling you in the only language it has that it trusts you. When you slow blink back, you are speaking its language. It is the closest thing cats have to saying I love you. And it is, if you are willing to accept communication on the cat's terms rather than your own, genuinely touching. There is also the head bump, the behavior in which a cat presses its forehead against you, or against your hand, or against your face if you are lying down. This is called bunting, and it serves a specific purpose. Cats have scent glands on their foreheads, on their cheeks, and on the base of their tails. When a cat bunts you, it is depositing its scent on you, marking you as part of its territory, as something that belongs to it, as something that is safe and familiar. In a colony of feral cats, bunting is a bonding behavior. Cats that are friendly with each other bunt each other regularly, reinforcing their social connection through the exchange of scent. When your cat presses its head against you, it is not just being affectionate. It is claiming you. It is saying, in the chemical language of scent that is far more important to cats than any vocalization, you are mine. So the cat communicates with you through a system that includes manipulative vocalizations designed to exploit your parental instincts, a therapeutic vibration that genuinely reduces your stress, a slow blink that means trust, and a head bump that means ownership. It is not the communication system of a dog. It is not loud. It is not obvious. It is not designed to make you feel like the center of the universe. It is subtle, it is conditional, and it operates largely on the cat's terms. But it is real. It is complex. And if you learn to read it, if you learn to listen to the different meows and feel the different purrs and return the slow blink and accept the head bump for what it is, you will find that your cat is saying quite a lot. It is just saying it quietly. There is a moment that nearly every cat owner has experienced. You wake up in the morning, or you come home from work, or you walk into the kitchen to make coffee, and there on the floor, placed with unmistakable deliberateness, positioned where you cannot possibly miss it, is a dead animal, a mouse, a bird, a lizard, sometimes a large insect, presented with the same gravity as if it were a lion brought down on the savannah. Your cat is nearby, watching you. Its expression is unreadable, but somehow expectant, as if it has presented you with a gift and is waiting to see whether you appreciate it. The most common explanation you will hear for this behavior is that your cat is trying to teach you to hunt. This interpretation is charming, and it is widely believed, and it is almost certainly wrong, or at least incomplete. The idea comes from the observation that mother cats bring dead and injured prey to their kittens as part of the process of teaching them to hunt. The progression is well documented. First, the mother brings dead prey, then injured prey that the kittens can practice catching, then live prey that must be hunted for real. The theory is that your cat, observing that you are a large, clumsy, apparently incompetent hunter who has never once caught a mouse despite living in the same house as several, has decided to intervene in your education. The problem with this theory is that it requires your cat to understand that you are a bad hunter, which requires your cat to have a theory of your mind, an understanding of your intentions and capabilities that is probably more sophisticated than what cats actually possess. The more likely explanation is simpler and, in its way, equally interesting. Your cat is bringing prey back to a safe location. In the wild, cats often carry their kills to a secure spot before eating them, a place where they are protected from larger predators that might steal the food. Your home is, from your cat's perspective, the safest place in its territory. It brings the dead mouse to your kitchen for the same reason it brings itself to your kitchen, because the kitchen is safe and comfortable and warm and associated with food. The fact that you are there is incidental. The mouse is not a gift for you. It is a meal brought home. Your cat is not teaching you anything. It is simply doing what cats do, eating where it feels secure. That said, there may be a social component. Spayed female cats are more likely to bring prey home than intact females or males, which suggests that the behavior is connected to maternal instincts that, in the absence of actual kittens, may be redirected toward the humans in the household. Your cat may not be consciously trying to teach you to hunt, but the behavior may be driven by the same neurological circuits that would, in a mother cat, motivate her to provision her young. You are not her kitten, but you may be, in some deep and unconscious part of her brain, close enough. And then there is the other behavior, the one that generates more discussion and more frustration and more viral videos than perhaps any other behavior in the entire repertoire of domestic cat conduct. The deliberate knocking of objects off tables. You have seen it. Everyone who has ever lived with a cat has seen it. The cat jumps onto the table. The cat approaches an object, a glass of water, a pen, a phone, a small decorative item that you value. The cat extends one paw. The cat touches the object. The cat pushes the object toward the edge of the table with a slowness that can only be described as theatrical. The cat pauses. The cat looks at you. You say no. The cat maintains eye contact. The cat pushes the object off the edge. The object falls. The object breaks. The cat watches the object fall with an expression of calm scientific interest, as if it has just conducted an experiment and is processing the results. Why do cats do this? The answer involves multiple factors, none of which include malice, though the appearance of malice is understandably difficult to dismiss when you are picking broken glass off the floor at 2 a.m. The first factor is prey investigation. In the wild, cats encounter small objects that might be prey. A beetle, a mouse that is playing dead, a small lizard that has stopped moving. The cat's instinct is to bat the object with its paw to see if it moves, to determine whether it is alive, whether it is edible, whether it is worth pursuing. When your cat bats a pen off your desk, it is running the same subroutine, testing the object, checking for signs of life, gathering information through touch. The fact that the object is obviously not alive and obviously not edible is irrelevant. The instinct does not distinguish between a beetle and a pen. It fires the same way, regardless. The second factor is gravity play. Cats are fascinated by falling objects. An object that falls off a table demonstrates a physical principle, that things move when pushed, that they accelerate as they fall, that they make interesting sounds when they hit the ground. For an animal whose survival depends on precise calculations of distance, speed, and trajectory, watching objects fall is not pointless. It is practice. It is calibration. The cat is learning about the physical properties of its environment, refining its understanding of how objects behave in space, maintaining the spatial awareness that makes it such an effective hunter. The third factor, and this is the one that cat owners find most exasperating, is attention. Cats learn very quickly which behaviors produce reactions from their humans. If knocking a glass off the table causes you to leap up, rush over, and interact with the cat, even if the interaction is negative, even if you are scolding the cat has achieved something. It has produced a response. It has made something happen in an environment that, for an animal that sleeps 16 hours a day and spends much of the remaining 8 waiting for something interesting to occur, may be profoundly boring. The cat is not being vindictive. It is being strategic. It has identified a reliable method for generating human attention, and it deploys that method with the calm efficiency of an animal that has been optimizing its environment for 10,000 years. Another behavior that puzzles cat owners is kneading, the rhythmic pressing motion that cats make with their front paws, usually against a soft surface, often against your stomach or your lap, sometimes accompanied by purring and a slightly glazed expression. Kittens need their mother's belly to stimulate milk flow during nursing. The behavior is associated from the very earliest moments of the cat's life with comfort, warmth, food, safety, and the presence of the mother. When an adult cat needs your lap, it is reverting to a behavior from infancy, a behavior triggered by the same feelings of comfort and security that it experienced as a nursing kitten. It is, in the most literal sense, treating you like its mother. This is one of the few cat behaviors that is unambiguously affectionate. A kneading cat is a cat that feels safe enough in your presence to regress to its most vulnerable state. Then there is the belly display. Your cat rolls onto its back and shows you its stomach, the softest, most vulnerable part of its body, the place where all the vital organs are closest to the surface, the place that a predator would target first in an attack. You interpret this as an invitation to rub the belly. You reach down. You touch the belly. The cat immediately grabs your hand with all 4 paws, bites you, kicks you with its hind legs, and then runs away as if you have committed an unforgivable offense. This is not a trick, though it feels like one. The belly display is a sign of trust. The cat is showing you that it feels safe enough in your presence to expose its most vulnerable area. But it is not an invitation to touch. In cat communication, exposing the belly means I trust you. It does not mean please touch my belly. When you touch the belly, you trigger a defensive reflex, the same reflex that would activate if a predator attacked from below. The cat grabs and kicks because its body interprets the touch as a threat, even though its mind, to whatever extent cats have conscious minds, knows that you are not dangerous. The reflex is faster than the knowledge. The body reacts before the brain can override it. Your cat is not betraying you. It is experiencing a conflict between trust and instinct, an instinct in a predator whose survival depends on fast reflexes, wins every time. Every strange thing your cat does makes sense when you understand what a cat is. It is not a small dog. It is not a furry human. It is a barely domesticated, solitary predator with sensory capabilities that dwarf your own, instincts that were forged over millions of years of evolution, and a relationship with you that exists on terms that it, not you, established. The dead mouse on the floor, the glass pushed off the table, the belly trap, the kneading, the 3 in the morning zoomies. All of it is the behavior of a wild animal doing its best to live in a world it was not designed for. And doing it, if you are willing to see it clearly, with a grace and an adaptability that is genuinely remarkable. There is a parasite that lives inside your cat. It is microscopic, single-celled, and extraordinarily successful. Its name is Toxoplasma gondii, and it may be, if some researchers are correct, one of the most influential organisms in the history of the relationship between cats and humans. Not because it is dangerous, though it can be, but because it may have quietly, invisibly, without anyone noticing for thousands of years, altered the way that humans feel about cats. The life cycle of Toxoplasma gondii is one of the most remarkable stories in all of parasitology. The parasite can infect virtually any warm-blooded animal, birds, rodents, livestock, humans, but it can only sexually reproduce inside the gut of a cat. A cat is the only definitive host. Every other animal is an intermediate host, a stepping stone, a temporary residence, a means of getting back to the only place where the parasite can complete its reproductive cycle. The entire evolutionary strategy of Toxoplasma gondii is organized around one goal: getting inside a cat. The way it accomplishes this goal is extraordinary. When Toxoplasma infects a rodent, a mouse, or a rat, it does something that no parasite should be able to do. It changes the rodent's behavior. Healthy mice and rats are terrified of cats. They flee from the scent of cat urine with an urgency that is deeply hardwired, an instinct so fundamental that it does not need to be learned. A mouse that has never seen a cat, that was born in a laboratory and has never been exposed to a predator of any kind, will still panic at the smell of cat urine. The fear is innate. It is written into the genome. Toxoplasma rewrites it. A mouse infected with Toxoplasma does not flee from cat urine. It is attracted to it. Studies have shown that infected mice actually seek out areas scented with cat urine, moving toward the smell that every instinct in their body should be telling them to avoid. Some researchers have described this as a suicidal attraction, though the mouse is not consciously choosing anything. The parasite has altered the neurochemistry of the mouse's brain, specifically targeting the amygdala, the region responsible for processing fear, and rewiring it so that the fear of cats is replaced by something that looks, at a neurological level, disturbingly like attraction. The result is predictable. The infected mouse approaches the cat. The cat catches the mouse. The cat eats the mouse. The parasite is now inside the cat, which is exactly where it needed to be. It reproduces in the cat's gut, produces millions of oocysts, tiny, resilient, environmentally stable capsules that are shed in the cat's feces, that contaminate the soil and water, that are ingested by new rodents, and the cycle begins again. It is an elegant, horrifying, brilliantly efficient system. The parasite has evolved to manipulate the behavior of one species in order to be eaten by another species so that it can reproduce. It is mind control in the most literal sense. Now here is where the story becomes uncomfortable. Toxoplasma gondii does not only infect mice, it infects humans. it infects a lot of humans. Current estimates suggest that somewhere between 30 and 50% of the global human population carries toxoplasma. Billions of people, most of whom were infected through contact with cat feces, through contaminated soil or water, or through undercooked meat from infected livestock. The infection is usually asymptomatic. Most people who carry toxoplasma never know they have it. The parasite forms cysts in the brain and muscle tissue that can persist for the lifetime of the host, sitting quietly, apparently doing nothing. Apparently, because over the past 2 decades, a growing body of research has suggested that toxoplasma may not be doing nothing. It may be doing in humans something similar to what it does in mice, subtly, almost imperceptibly, altering behavior. The research is controversial, and it is important to say that up front. The findings are correlational, not causal. The effects, if they exist, are small, and the field is plagued by the difficulty of separating genuine effects from statistical noise in studies involving a parasite that infects billions of people. But the pattern that has emerged from dozens of studies is at least suggestive, and for some researchers, deeply provocative. Studies have found that people infected with toxoplasma show subtle differences in personality and behavior compared to uninfected people. Infected men tend to score higher on measures of suspiciousness and jealousy, and lower on measures of rule consciousness and group conformity. Infected women tend to score higher on measures of warmth and outgoingness, and lower on measures of suspiciousness. The effects are opposite in men and women, which is itself puzzling and has not been fully explained. Infected individuals of both sexes have slower reaction times, a finding that has been replicated in multiple studies, and that has led to the startling claim that toxoplasma-infected drivers are significantly more likely to be involved in traffic accidents. Some studies have found associations between toxoplasma infection and higher rates of schizophrenia, though the evidence here is particularly contentious and the causal mechanism, if any, remains unclear. And then there is the most speculative, most provocative, and most difficult to prove hypothesis of all. Some researchers have suggested that toxoplasma may influence how humans feel about cats. If the parasite can make a mouse attracted to the smell of cat urine, if it can fundamentally rewire a rodent's fear response to produce attraction where there should be aversion, is it possible that it could do something similar at a much more subtle level in a human brain? Could toxoplasma make people like cats more than they otherwise would? Could the parasite that needs to get inside a cat to reproduce be gently, invisibly nudging its human hosts to keep cats close, to take care of cats, to fill the internet with pictures of cats? This is, to be clear, a hypothesis. It has not been proven. The evidence for it is indirect and circumstantial at best. No study has definitively shown that toxoplasma-infected humans are more likely to own cats or to feel more affection toward cats than uninfected humans. The idea is seductive precisely because it is so narratively satisfying. The notion that our love for cats is not entirely our own, that we are being quietly manipulated by a microscopic organism that has been pulling strings behind the scenes for millennia. It is the kind of idea that works better as a story than as science. But the fact that it is even plausible, the fact that there exists a parasite that can alter mammalian behavior, that this parasite is specifically adapted to cats, and that it resides in the brains of billions of humans, is itself extraordinary. There is also the practical side of toxoplasma, which is less speculative and more urgent. For most healthy adults, toxoplasma infection is genuinely harmless. The immune system contains the parasite. The cysts in the brain remain dormant, and the host never experiences any symptoms. But for people with weakened immune systems, particularly those with advanced cases of acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, the parasite can reactivate, causing a potentially fatal brain infection called toxoplasmic encephalitis. And for pregnant women, a new toxoplasma infection acquired during pregnancy can cross the placenta and infect the developing fetus, causing severe birth defects, including brain damage, blindness, and miscarriage. This is why pregnant women are advised to avoid cleaning litter boxes. The risk is not from the cat itself, but from the oocysts shed in the cat's feces, which become infectious after 1 to 5 days of exposure to air. The cat, of course, is oblivious to all of this. The cat does not know that it is the definitive host of a parasite that has infected a third of the human species. The cat does not know that something living in its gut has the ability to rewrite the brain chemistry of mice, and possibly, of the humans who share its home. The cat eats, sleeps, purrs, hunts, and knocks things off tables, unaware that it is the center of one of the strangest biological relationships in the natural world. It is a relationship that has persisted for as long as cats and humans have lived together. Toxoplasma has been infecting humans since the first cat walked into the first grain store 10,000 years ago. It is woven into the history of the partnership so deeply that separating them is impossible. Whether or not toxoplasma makes us love cats, it is undeniably part of the story. It is the invisible third party in the relationship, the microscopic passenger that has been along for the ride since the beginning, reproducing quietly in the cat's gut, forming cysts quietly in the human's brain, shaping the ecology of the partnership in ways that we are only beginning to understand. It is one more reason why the relationship between cats and humans is unlike any other relationship between any two species on Earth. It is not just a story about an animal and its owner. It is a story about a predator, a companion, a parasite, and a bond that may be more complicated and more strange than anyone who has ever scratched a cat behind the ears has ever imagined. In the year 2007, a website was launched with the name I Can Has Cheeseburger. The name was deliberately misspelled. The concept was aggressively simple. Users uploaded photographs of cats with humorous captions written in broken, intentionally ungrammatical English, a style that became known as lolspeak, a language that no human actually spoke, but that everyone immediately understood. The cats in the photographs were ordinary household cats, not purebreds, not professionally photographed, not doing anything particularly extraordinary. They were sitting in boxes. They were making funny faces. They were lying in improbable positions. They were doing the things that cats do, captured by camera phones and digital cameras that were, for the first time in history, in the pockets and hands of hundreds of millions of ordinary people. The website was an immediate, enormous, and slightly baffling success. Within months, it was receiving millions of page views per day. Within 2 years, the company behind it was valued at $2 million, when it was acquired by a media group that saw correctly the cat content on the internet was not a passing fad, but a genuine cultural phenomenon. Ike and his cheeseburger did not invent the internet cat. People had been sharing pictures of their cats online since the earliest days of the web. But it gave the phenomenon a name, a format, and a platform, and in doing so, it helped create something that had never existed before, a global, participatory, endlessly renewable genre of content built entirely around the domestic cat. The LOL cat was not the first famous internet cat. That distinction probably belongs to a cat named Keyboard Cat, a video originally recorded in 1984 of an orange tabby named Fatso, wearing a blue shirt and appearing to play an electronic keyboard. The video was uploaded to YouTube in 2007 and became one of the earliest viral animal videos, accumulating millions of views and spawning a format in which the keyboard cat clip was edited onto the end of videos showing people failing or making mistakes, a musical send-off, a feline farewell, as if the cat were playing the person off the stage of life. And then came Nyan Cat, a 2011 animation of a cartoon cat with the body of a Pop-Tart flying through space, leaving a rainbow trail behind it, accompanied by a looping Japanese pop song that burrowed into your brain and refused to leave. Nyan Cat was not a real cat. It was an animated GIF, a piece of internet folk art, a deliberately absurd creation that made no sense and required no sense. It accumulated over 200 million views on YouTube. It was eventually sold as a non-fungible token for approximately $600,000. A cartoon cat made of breakfast pastry, flying through space on a rainbow, was worth more than most houses. Something was happening. Something was happening on the internet that was bigger than any individual cat or any individual video. Something that had to do with the nature of the internet itself and the nature of cats themselves, and the strange, powerful intersection of the two. By the early 2010s, cats were not just popular on the internet. They were dominant. They were, by some metrics, the single most popular category of content on the entire internet. More popular than music, more popular than sports, more popular than news, more popular than any other animal by a factor that was not even close. A study conducted in 2015 estimated that there were over 2 million cat videos on YouTube alone, and that they had been viewed a collective 26 billion times. 26 billion views. For cats. The question that researchers, journalists, and cultural commentators began asking was simple and surprisingly difficult to answer. Why cats? Why not dogs, which are more popular as pets in most countries? Why not babies, which trigger even stronger nurturing instincts? Why not any of the other things that humans find appealing and shareable and emotionally satisfying? What is it about cats, specifically, that made them the animal of the internet? Several theories have been proposed, and the truth probably involves all of them working together. The first theory is practical. Cats are indoor animals. Dogs go outside. Dogs go to parks, go on walks, go to beaches and trails and open spaces where the lighting is variable and the backgrounds are cluttered, and the dog is often a small figure in a large landscape. Cats stay home. Cats sit on desks and beds and couches and kitchen counters in environments that are well lit, visually simple, and close to the cameras that their owners carry in their pockets at all times. Cats are simply easier to photograph and film than dogs. They are more available, more accessible, more likely to do something interesting in a space where a camera is within arm's reach. The second theory is behavioral. Cats are unpredictable in a way that dogs are not. A dog's behavior is broadly legible. You can usually tell what a dog is about to do, because dogs signal their intentions with their entire bodies, their tails, their ears, their posture. Cats are opaque. A cat can be sitting perfectly still one moment and executing an acrobatic leap the next, with no visible transition between the two states. A cat can be purring contentedly and then, without warning, bite the hand that is petting it. A cat's face is comparatively expressionless. The flat face, the large eyes, the small mouth create a kind of blank canvas onto which humans project emotions, intentions, and inner states that may or may not actually exist. This unpredictability is, in the economy of internet attention, incredibly valuable. Unpredictability creates surprise. Surprise creates engagement. Engagement creates shares. A cat video is a tiny slot machine. You never quite know what is going to happen, and that uncertainty is what keeps you watching. The third theory is emotional, and it comes from research conducted at Indiana University by Jessica Gall Myrick, who surveyed nearly 7,000 internet users about their cat video watching habits. Myrick found that watching cat videos had a measurably positive effect on the viewer's emotional state. It increased positive emotions like happiness and contentment, and it decreased negative emotions like anxiety, annoyance, and sadness. People who watched cat videos reported feeling more energetic and more positive afterward. The effect was small but consistent, and it held up even when controlling for personality type, cat ownership status, and the reason the person had started watching the video in the first place. There is something about the form of the cat, the round face, the large eyes, the small nose, the soft fur, the compact body, that activates what ethologists call the baby schema response. Baby schema refers to a set of physical features: large head relative to body, large eyes, round cheeks, small chin, that trigger nurturing and protective instincts in adult humans. These features are present in human infants, and they are also present to a remarkable degree, in cats. When you look at a cat's face, your brain processes it through some of the same neural pathways that it uses to process an infant's face. You feel tenderness. You feel a desire to care for it. You feel involuntarily and automatically the warm pull of something that resembles parental love. The internet did not create our fascination with cats. It amplified it. It took a relationship that was 10,000 years old, a relationship built on mutual convenience, shaped by evolutionary biology, complicated by parasites and persecution and worship and war, and gave it a global stage, an infinite audience, and an endlessly renewable supply of content. The LOL cats of 2007 were not the beginning of anything new. They were the latest iteration of something ancient, the human impulse to watch cats, to be charmed by cats, to share the experience of cats with other humans. The Egyptians painted cats on the walls of their tombs. The Romans depicted cats in their mosaics. Medieval monks drew cats in the margins of their manuscripts, often badly, in a way that suggests the monks were better at theology than they were at feline anatomy. And now, in the 21st century, we photograph cats with our phones and share them with strangers across the world. The medium changes. The impulse does not. On September 22nd, 2012, a user on the website Reddit posted a photograph of a cat. The cat was small, female, and had a distinctive facial expression that appeared to human eyes to communicate profound and permanent displeasure with absolutely everything. The cat's real name was Tartar Sauce. She was a mixed breed cat from Morristown, Arizona, and her unusual appearance was the result of feline dwarfism and an underbite that pushed her lower jaw forward, creating a natural frown that she could not help and that she wore every moment of every day. Within 48 hours of the photograph being posted, it had been viewed millions of times. Within a week, Tartar Sauce had a new name, Grumpy Cat, and a career that would make her one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. The speed of Grumpy Cat's rise was breathtaking, even by the accelerated standards of internet fame. Within months of that first Reddit post, Grumpy Cat had her own website, her own social media accounts with millions of followers, a talent agent, a line of merchandise, a best-selling book, and a made-for-television movie. Her image was printed on coffee mugs, t-shirts, calendars, greeting cards, phone cases, and an almost infinite variety of other products. She made appearances on television shows, at awards ceremonies, at corporate events where companies paid substantial fees for the privilege of having a small, permanently frowning cat sit on a table while executives gathered around to take photographs. At the peak of her fame, Grumpy Cat's owner reported that the cat had generated approximately $100 million in revenue. $100 million. For a cat whose only talent was looking annoyed. The genius of Grumpy Cat, if genius is the right word for something that was entirely accidental, was that her face was a perfect meme template. A meme needs a clear, immediately readable emotional signal, something that can be understood in a fraction of a second, that requires no explanation, that works across languages and cultures. Grumpy Cat's face said one thing and one thing only. No, I do not approve. No, I'm not happy about this. No, I do not want to participate. It was the face of universal dissatisfaction, of cosmic refusal, of the kind of baseline irritation with existence that every human being has felt, but that few can express as purely and as economically as a small cat with an underbite. People projected their own frustrations onto that face. Monday morning, grumpy cat. Bad day at work, grumpy cat. The entirety of the human condition reduced to a single, unchanging feline frown. Grumpy Cat was not alone. She was the most famous, but she was part of a wave, an entire generation of cats that became celebrities on the internet, each famous for a specific physical characteristic or behavioral quirk that made them visually distinctive and endlessly shareable. There was Lil Bub, a cat born in 2011 with a rare combination of genetic conditions, dwarfism, polydactyly, and a jaw that never fully developed, leaving her tongue permanently sticking out of her mouth. Lil Bub looked like a kitten that had been frozen in time, permanently small, permanently wide-eyed, permanently astonished by the world. Her owner, a musician named Mike Bredavsky from Bloomington, Indiana, documented her life on social media and turned her fame into something genuinely meaningful. Lil Bub's social media presence raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for animal shelters and special needs pets. She was the subject of a documentary. She was, in a way, the Grumpy Cat's more commercial empire never quite achieved, beloved, not just famous, but genuinely loved by millions of people who felt a connection to this small, strange, improbable animal. There was Colonel Meow, a Himalayan Persian mix with the longest fur ever recorded on a cat, 9 inches, and a facial expression that made Grumpy Cat look cheerful by comparison. Colonel Meow looked like a villain from a spy movie, a cat that was clearly plotting the overthrow of human civilization, and that wanted you to know. There was Maru, a Scottish fold from Japan, whose obsession with jumping into boxes of various sizes made him one of the most watched cats on YouTube, with hundreds of millions of views across his videos. There was Venus, a cat with a face that was split precisely down the middle, one half black with a green eye, the other half orange tabby with a blue eye, a genetic chimera that looked like 2 different cats merged into one. Each of these cats became famous for the same fundamental reason. They were visually distinctive in a way that photographed well and that could be immediately understood. The internet rewards visual clarity. It rewards faces that can be read instantly in the half second that a user spends deciding whether to scroll past or to stop and look. And cats, with their flat faces and large eyes and relatively limited range of visible expression, are extraordinarily good at this. A cat's face is simple enough to read at a glance, but ambiguous enough to support projection. The viewer sees what they want to see, feels what they want to feel, interprets the cat's expression through the lens of their own emotional state. Grumpy Cat was never grumpy. She was a cat with a medical condition that affected the shape of her jaw. But we saw grumpiness because we wanted to see grumpiness, because the projection was satisfying, because the story we told ourselves about that face was more entertaining than the biological reality. The celebrity cat phenomenon peaked in the mid-2000s and has since evolved into something less concentrated but more pervasive. There are no longer singular breakout cat celebrities on the scale of Grumpy Cat. Instead, there are thousands of cat accounts on Instagram and TikTok, each with audiences ranging from a few thousand to several million, collectively generating a volume of cat content that dwarfs anything that existed in the LOL cat era. The individual stars are smaller, but the ecosystem is vastly larger. Cat content has become a permanent, self-sustaining genre. Not a fad, not a trend, but a stable category of internet media that shows no signs of declining. Grumpy Cat died on May 14th, 2019, at the age of 7, from complications related to a urinary tract infection. Her owner announced her death on social media, and the response was extraordinary. Millions of people expressed grief, shared memories, posted their favorite images. News organizations around the world ran obituaries. The outpouring of emotion was genuine and widespread, and to anyone who had not been paying attention to the evolution of internet culture, probably bewildering. A cat had died, and the world mourned. Lil Bub died 7 months later, in December of 2019, also at the age of 8. The grief was, if anything, even more intense. Lil Bub had been less of a brand and more of a personality, and the people who loved her felt that they had lost not a celebrity, but a friend. Mike Bradowski posted a tribute that was simple and devastating in its directness. The comments numbered in the tens of thousands. People who had never met this cat, who had only ever seen her through a screen, who had no rational reason to grieve for an animal that was not theirs, grieved anyway, because the connection, however mediated, however parasocial, however irrational, had been real. They had watched this cat for years. They had followed her life. And now, she was gone. This is what the internet did to the relationship between cats and humans. It did not change the fundamental nature of the bond. The bond was already ancient, already deep, already strange, but it extended the bond beyond the walls of the home, beyond the boundaries of direct physical contact, into a space where millions of people could love the same cat simultaneously, could share in its life, could mourn its death. The internet made the cat a global companion, not just your cat in your home, on your lap, but the cat, the idea of the cat, the image of the cat, the eternal, endlessly renewable presence of the cat on every screen, in every feed, in every corner of the digital world. So, does your cat love you? After 10,000 years, after the grain stores of Mesopotamia and the temples of Egypt and the bonfires of medieval France and the decks of the ships that carried cats to every corner of the world, after the parasites and the purring and the dead mice and the slow blink and the belly trap and the 30% of the human population walking around with a microscopic organism in their brain that may or may not be quietly nudging them toward affection, for a small predator that never asked for their affection in the first place. After all of that, does your cat love you? The honest answer is, we don't know. Not exactly. Not in the way we know that a dog loves you, with its tail and its face and its entire trembling body communicating the fact so loudly and so constantly that there is no room for doubt. The cat does not communicate that way. The cat has never communicated that way. And if you have spent this much time listening to the history of cats, you already understand why. The cat is a solitary predator. It did not evolve in a social group. It did not develop the neural architecture for the kind of open, demonstrative, unconditional attachment that dogs feel for their people. It was not shaped by thousands of years of selective breeding to gaze into your eyes and feel a surge of oxytocin. It came to you on its own terms. It has always been on its own terms. That is not going to change. But here is what we do know. We know that cats form genuine attachments to their humans. Studies using the same attachment tests developed to measure bonds between human infants and their caregivers have shown that cats display secure attachment behavior toward their owners. They use their humans as a safe base. They are calmer and more exploratory in an unfamiliar environment when their owner is present. They show signs of distress when separated from the people they live with. Not the dramatic, vocal, all-consuming distress of a dog, but something quieter, something real. We know that cats choose to be near the people they are attached to, not because they have to. The cat does not have to do anything. The cat has never done anything it did not want to do. When your cat follows you from room to room, when it waits for you near the door, when it chooses your lap over every other surface in the house, it is making a choice. It is choosing you. Not with the enthusiasm of a dog, not with the full-body declaration of unconditional devotion that dogs perform effortlessly, but with the quiet, considered, deliberate preference of an animal that has never in the history of its species done anything it did not freely decide to do. We know that the slow blink is real, that the head bump is real, that the kneading is real, that when your cat presses its forehead against your face in the dark at 3 a.m, that is not nothing. That is the closest thing a solitary predator can offer to the word love. It does not translate perfectly. Nothing about the cat translates perfectly into human terms, but it is real, and it is meant for you, and that matters. The cat is not a dog. It will never be a dog. It does not want to be a dog, and it does not understand why you would want it to be. The cat is something older, something stranger, something that has been with us longer than writing, longer than cities, longer than the wheel, and that has emerged from 10,000 years of living alongside the noisiest, most destructive, most complicated species in the history of life on Earth, with its essential nature almost entirely intact. That is not a small thing. That is, in its way, extraordinary. The cat walked into our lives uninvited. It looked at the situation. It decided the arrangement was acceptable. And it stayed. Not because we bred it to stay. Not because it had nowhere else to go. But because across 100 centuries and every civilization that has risen and fallen since the invention of agriculture, it kept choosing to stay. That is the only answer the cat has ever given to the question of whether it loves us. Not a bark, not a wag, just the quiet, patient, undemonstrative fact of its continued presence. It stayed. It is still here. And if you have spent any time at all with a cat, you know that for this particular animal, that is everything. Thank you for spending this time with Histomnia. If this kind of story helps you rest, consider subscribing. It truly helps the channel grow. Leave a comment and tell us where you are in the world and what time it is there. We love knowing who is with us in the quiet hours. Close your eyes if you like. Let the sounds of the world around you grow quiet. And good night.